My husband had been unreasonably ignoring me since Christmas. In an attempt to repair our relationship, I made a special New Year's dish and said to him on New Year's morning, "Happy New Year." Silence. I had hoped for a response at least during the New Year, but that hope was quickly betrayed. Despite feeling hurt inside, I decided to talk to my husband. "I worked hard to prepare a special dish. Will you try it?" Then, the next moment, my husband silently dumped the stack of boxes on the table into the trash. "What are you doing?" My husband continued to stare at me in silence, with a smirk on his face. Seeing that expression, I reached my limit. I can't be with this man as a wife any longer. I then silently confronted him with the divorce papers. 1 month later, my husband's life would be hell. My name is Zoe Sanders, and I'm 29 years old. I've been married for 2 years and am a stay-at-home mom. My husband's name is Mark. We met through a friend's introduction. Mark, who works for a major advertising agency, approached me from the beginning. Having had few romantic relationships, I immediately fell in love and started dating. After 2 years of dating, Mark proposed to me, and I happily accepted.
"I really like kids. I want them soon."
Mark, you're in a hurry. But I like children too. I hope we'll be blessed. After that conversation, Mark's expression turned serious. "I need to go and tell my mom about our marriage."
"I hope she'll be happy."
"My mother will be overjoyed. I'm her only daughter getting married." Actually, I was raised in a single-parent household. When I was 3 years old, my parents separated, and my mother took me with her. I have vague memories of my father, and we haven't met since then. I think he was a kind person, but I don't know the details of their separation. I haven't inquired about the circumstances that led to their separation. But since my mother seemed unwilling to talk about it, I have never probed further. Since then, I was raised by my mother, growing up as the only daughter. Our life was modest, but as a parent and child, we supported each other and our bond was strong. When I reported my marriage to my mother, she jumped for joy.
"Zoe, be happy. Mark, please, take care of my daughter."
My mother said this with tears in her eyes, and Mark responded with a smile.
"Of course, Mom."
I felt the greatest happiness at the sight of it. I was convinced that I would spend my life with Mark.
"That's right, Zoe. Did you inform Hannah about the marriage?"
"Oh yes, Hannah was delighted too. Of course, I'll invite her to the wedding." Hannah is the name of my childhood friend. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same nursery school, and stayed together until high school. Hannah got along well with my mother. Now she lives a little away. When I reported my marriage to her, she also told me that she was dating someone with the intention of marriage. After that, Mark and I registered our marriage and had a wedding as planned. Hannah attended the ceremony, and I was at peak happiness. The only thing that was a mystery was the gorgeous floral arrangement that arrived at the ceremony from an unknown sender. I quickly forgot about it. Later, I became a housewife at Mark's request, and our married life began. However, within a year, our relationship became awkward. The cause was our inability to have children. It seems it didn't work this month either. As I reported this with my shoulders drooped, Mark told me in an annoyed tone,
"Again? When will you get pregnant?"
There's no need to say it like that.
I've been saying I like kids and want them for a long time. Maybe it's because you're not making enough of an effort that we can't have a child.
I'm doing my best.
You're not fulfilling your duties as a wife, even though I'm the one providing for you.
With teary eyes, I looked down, and Mark left, muttering something. Mark not only blamed me for not being able to have children, but also started complaining about my housework, and I gradually became exhausted. 1 year into marriage, the state of our relationship was uncertain. However, I didn't want to make the only person who rejoiced in my marriage, my mother, sad. That was my determination. At that time, I received a message from my mother asking me to come and see her. Returning to my parents' house, I was surprised. "Mom, why are you losing so much weight? And what's the story?" To my inquiries, my mother quietly replied,
Actually, I've been diagnosed with cancer. I'll undergo treatment, but we don't know what will happen.
"Mom, I'll be by your side as much as possible. I'll support you."
Thank you, Zoe, but try not to inconvenience Mark.
In consideration of my mother, who was even concerned about Mark at such a time, I couldn't bring up the unjust complaints I received from him. That day when I returned home, I told Mark about my mother. "So, my mother will be undergoing treatment. I'll be going to the hospital for a while to take care of her." Mark unexpectedly responded with this.
Huh? Then who will take care of things at home during that time?
"I'll try to manage the household as much as possible. You might need to help a bit, though." Upon hearing this, Mark let out a disdainful laugh.
You want me to help with household chores? And don't be ridiculous. Listen, household chores will still be your responsibility, just like before.
"But..."
Also, I won't contribute a penny to your mother's medical expenses. Handle it on your own.
I was left speechless. Even in such a situation with our family, I expected a little cooperation. This hope was completely shattered.
If you can't manage the house properly while taking care of your mother, I won't let you off easy. I won't be kind enough to support a useless wife who can't get pregnant or handle housework.
Mark glared at me. Remembering my mother's situation and her request not to trouble him, I could only nod. After that, the days were hectic. I managed my time, making brief visits to my mother's hospital and taking care of household chores. My mother seemed to be undergoing quite harsh chemotherapy. It was difficult for me to witness her in such a condition. Since I started visiting my mother's hospital about a month ago, the season had turned to December. It was during this time that my childhood friend Hannah made a certain request of me. I agreed to it, thinking it was for the sake of my friend. And so the events of Christmas Eve unfolded. When I returned from visiting my mother's hospital, Mark was waiting for me.
Hey, you've really become miserable, you know?
Huh? With a condescending look, he suddenly said that, leaving me surprised. What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. You truly are the worst wife ever. I don't want to hear anything from you anymore.
What? After that, no matter how many times I tried to talk to Mark, he wouldn't respond. Since then, Mark started ignoring my existence. No matter how much I spoke to him, he wouldn't answer. Even a simple greeting like goodbye or welcome back was met with averted eyes and a sigh. Living like this, my mental state was gradually deteriorating. Being criticized was painful, but being ignored made me feel like my worth had disappeared. In the days leading up to the new year, while my mother slept in her hospital room, I received a call from Hannah. Yes, it was as I thought. Zoe, thank you. It's fine, but are you okay? I'm fine. Zoe, why do you sound so down? Is something wrong? Unable to hold back, I poured out the days of being dismissed and ignored by Mark to Hannah. She listened and sympathized, and that alone lightened my heart. After hanging up the phone, I looked at my mother, and her eyes were open. Huh? Oh, Mom, were you listening?
Yes. Come here, Zoe. It must have been tough.
I had tried to keep it from my worrying mother, but everything was exposed. In that shock, my mother quietly told me something important.
Zoe, I'm going to tell you something now, and you need to listen very carefully.
Then my mother revealed something astonishing. After that, Mark's silent treatment continued. I, on the other hand, had been preparing special dishes since New Year's Eve. Mark, who had been ignoring me since Christmas, might speak to me again now that it's a new year. I hoped that these special dishes would be the catalyst. In our silent home, I quietly prepared the food. Mark silently drank beer and watched TV. Eventually, Mark went to bed before the date changed that day. After finishing the dishes, I went to bed, feeling downcast. The next morning, as I stood in the kitchen, Mark also woke up. Happy New Year! I hoped that I might get a response at least for New Year's, but that expectation was quickly betrayed. Hurt inside, I talked to my husband. I worked hard to prepare a special dish. Will you try it? Then the next moment, my husband silently dumped the stack of boxes on the table into the trash. What are you doing? Mark, grinning silently, stared at me while I panicked. Seeing that expression, I made up my mind. He attacked me unilaterally for not being able to have children and ignored me for more than a week. And now, this is what he does to me? I can't be married to this man any longer. I took out the divorce papers, always kept as a backup for my bag. I silently thrust them towards Mark.
What's the deal with having this kind of thing already?
It was the first time I heard my husband's voice in a while.
Fine, let's get a divorce. There's no point in being with a failure like you anymore. A jobless divorced woman whose mother is on the verge of kicking the bucket will be a sight to behold.
Mark signs the divorce papers while glaring at me. Having witnessed that, I took the divorce papers from him, packed my things, and left the house. 1 month later, I was at my mother's hospital when Mark called. I chose to ignore it and left my phone aside. However, the calls continued every few minutes. He was persistent, like a relentless ogre. I continued to ignore him. As I exited the hospital, Mark was waiting for me. He tried talking to me about something he wanted to know, but I continued to ignore him. We eventually arrived at the high-rise apartment where I lived. He looked around, dumbfounded.
Hey, are you living here now? Why is a jobless person like you living in a luxury apartment like this?
Let's go upstairs. I don't want a scene in the entrance. I led him to the living room of my home.
Hey, explain yourself first. You, with no significant money, how can you afford to live in a place like this?
Regarding this house? My father helped me out. He thought I might have nowhere to go after the divorce, so he offered support.
What? Your father? Aren't you from a single-parent household?
I explained the situation. I told him about my mother's request to contact my father, who was born into a wealthy family. In fact, my father was born to a very wealthy family and fell in love with my mother, who was a maid, and I was born. However, my father's parents didn't approve of their mismatched marriage. They continued to harass my mother, who eventually fell ill. To protect me from further harassment, he promised my mother never to be involved again and left. While pretending to have no contact with my mother, my father secretly supported us whenever we needed financial help. He even sent a large flower arrangement for my wedding. Upon receiving my call, my father learned about my and my mother's current situation. When we reunited, he embraced me, expressing that he had always wanted to see me. He promised to be on our side now that both his opposing parents were no longer around. Upon learning about the troubles I faced with Mark and my desire for a divorce, my father said he would arrange a place for me after the divorce. It turned out that he still cared for my mother, agreeing to help take care of her as well. So that's how I'm living in this house now. I found a job through my father's connections, and I received a large living gift, so I'm not hurting for money. Too bad you won't get to see my miserable state. As I casually shared this, Mark bit his lip, looking frustrated.
Huh! Even with all that money, you're still miserable. After all, your body can't have children.
What?
I saw it on Christmas Day, the results of the infertility clinic's examination. You kept it a secret from me. What a fraud. That's why I stopped talking to you.
Ah, so that's it. I finally understood. At the same time, laughter welled up within me. Did you even bother to check the name on those test results?
Huh? It was delivered to our place, so it must be yours.
Those were my childhood friend's test results. That was the favor Hannah asked me. She was about to get married and had the infertility test done, but she couldn't muster the courage to check the results herself. That was her request to me. Unfortunately, she was diagnosed as unable to conceive. What Mark saw was the test result I received on behalf of Hannah. You misunderstood, and that's why you kept ignoring me. I had the test myself, and there was no problem. If anything, maybe the infertility issue lies with you. Give it a try. Get tested.
What? There's no way.
In response to Mark's agitation, I asked the question. So you said there's something you want to ask me, right? What's the main issue?
Oh, right. Do you know the major housing company called A House? They're a client of my company, and suddenly they want to terminate our contract.
Oh, really? What's the reason?
They claim it's my fault. So, I asked them for the reason, and they said to check with my ex-wife. What the hell is going on?
Upon hearing this, I chuckled. Mark looked bewildered.
What the hell is happening?
Do you know the name of the president of A House?
Huh? I think it's Richie Anderson.
That's him, right? I pointed to the entrance of the room. Standing there was my father.
Huh? Why is the president Mr. Anderson here?
Mark stood up in amazement. Dad cleared his throat and replied.
I heard my daughter invited her lousy ex-husband to the house. What's wrong with me, the father, coming to see him? Daughter? Zoe's father is President Anderson?
Knowing everything, Mark was dismayed, and my father revealed the truth.
Now that I know what you did to Zoe, I have no intention of doing business with your company. Now get out if you understand.
Mark finally lost his composure and turned to me.
Zoe, if the contract with A House is terminated, I won't be able to stay at the company. Please, ask your father to reconsider. Let's start over. Let's build a happy family this time, even if we can't have children.
I pushed away the desperate Mark and shouted like this. You can't just say whatever you want. Who's going to forget the things you did to me? I won't entertain the idea of starting over, not in a million years. I'll never forgive you, you jerk.
That's...
Mark was covered in tears and mucus. My father, grabbing him by the collar, kicked him out of the house. Later on, Mark faced dismissal from the company as a form of accountability for the contract termination initiated by A House. Further tests showed that he was indeed infertile.
Even without children, we could have been happy. Let's remarry.
Mysterious and inexplicable phone call came through, but when my father hired a lawyer to issue a warning, the contact abruptly ceased. It seems Mark is currently residing in an old studio apartment while intensely job hunting. Despite his prideful nature, I hope he confronts the challenges of this lifestyle and lives reflecting on his past actions. On the other hand, as for me, I'm working hard while living in the high-rise apartment provided by my father. Following successful treatment, my mother is now living with my father. Hannah, my childhood friend, seems to have found happiness as well, as her fiancé expressed a willingness to marry her despite her revelation about infertility. From now on, I hope to take care of my family and friends, and find my own happiness.